Former President Trump now taking aim at two former Republican allies in the U.S. Senate who refused to back the big lie, according to a new book. Bob Woodward and Robert Costa write in the book Peril that Senators Mike Lee and Lindsey Graham investigated Trump's claims of fraud in the 2020 election and found they added up to nothing. Here's part of a new statement from Trump. It says, quote, "I spent virtually no time with Senators Mike Lee of Utah or Lindsey Graham of South Carolina talking about the 2020 presidential election scam, or as it is viewed by many, the crime of the century. Lindsey and Mike should be ashamed of themselves for not putting up the fight necessary to win." Joining us now, we have CNN political commentator Ana Navarro to talk about this. Anna, what do you think about what he's saying? They should be ashamed of themselves.
You know, these are revelations, but they're not revelations about Donald Trump's character, right? It's very consistent with the Donald Trump that we got to know in the last 5 years. And so, no matter how loyal people like Lindsey Graham and Mike Lee were to him for years, they were his acolytes, they were his rubber stamps on so many issues. They were by his side. Lindsey Graham was practically his mini-me, a symbiotic twin. Regardless of all that, the minute they turn on him, the minute they're not willing to cross a bridge that is a bridge too far because it is about destroying democracy and based on lies, then they're not loyal. Then he turns on them and he turns all the cannons on them. And I think it explains some of Lindsey's actions after the election, where we saw him quickly try to go to Mar-a-Lago and try to make up with him. But I mean, it's crazy. It is never enough for Trump because it's always about one thing, Donald Trump.
Well, I'm sure Lindsey Graham's going to quit Donald Trump now, Anna, right?
Hold your breath, why don't you? I'll bring over an oxygen tank.
But seriously, I mean, why? It just is another thing where Lindsey Graham could not possibly do more to curry favor with Donald Trump. I mean, yes, he said, count me out on January 7th or whatever it was, but he didn't mean it, because obviously he didn't count him out, because he's still playing golf with Donald Trump and talking to him whenever he can. And Trump criticizing him today for what's in the book. But I can't imagine this is going to keep Lindsey Graham from going to play golf tomorrow.
I can't either. I mean, I think there's not enough time in this program to psychoanalyze Lindsey Graham and his need for a padrino, a big brother, to be somebody's sidekick, whether it's John McCain or Donald Trump.
I want to ask you, Anna, about what we're seeing at the border and how, for instance, Fox and some in the GOP, many in the GOP are responding to it. There seems to be an increase in talking about that this is replacement theory, that this is migrants coming in essentially to benefit Democrats. Let's listen.
The only conclusion any rational person can reach is this is deliberate, this is intentional, this is exactly what Hillary Clinton campaigned on in 2016 when she talked about a borderless hemisphere.
Nothing about it is an accident, obviously. It's intentional. Joe Biden did it on purpose. This policy is called the Great Replacement, the replacement of legacy Americans with more obedient people from faraway countries.
I mean, Anna.
Look, the one thing I agree with that is that very little of this is accidental. I think it's, I think it's very suspicious, and it's very reminiscent of the caravan that happened right before the midterms, which is an immigration issue that was that happened all of a sudden. You've got tens of thousands of people showing up at the southern border, and it's used to inflame the political passions. This is a very difficult nut for Joseph Biden to crack. He's got issues with his own party, who are being critical and attacking him for not being welcoming enough. And then it's also a huge issue and becoming one that frankly inflames racism and division and us versus them and invasion and invaders and alien prototypes and stereotypes within the Republican Party. Look, the truth of the matter is that this is a humanitarian crisis, that this is tens of thousands of people fleeing political strife, fleeing poverty, fleeing political corruption. But I think there's many questions to be asked as to what is happening in the southern border. And I think, I think we have not seen all the facts here. This situation, I think, has many more layers to the onion than what we have seen as of yet.
Yeah, and look, you can talk about issues at the border and a clear problem with an influx of migrants, but replacement theory isn't even thinly veiled racism. I mean, you heard Tucker Carlson say it. What's a legacy American? It rhymes with white, Anna. And so he's saying that white people are being replaced.
Which was such a bastion, right? Such a pillar for the foundation of Donald Trump's campaign. Make white people feel anger. Sow division within Americans. Make it so that you are feeding into this idea that black and brown people are coming across the border and replacing us. Think about Jews will not replace us in Charlottesville. Think about all these things. Think about the manifesto of the man who went to the Walmart and shot over 20 Latinos, hunted them down in El Paso, Texas. Think of all those things and just how, it was about divide and conquer. And I think that they saw in that a winning strategy, making white people feel angry, feel distressed, feel passionately okay to be racist. So this is conflating the immigration issue with racism. If it was 20,000 Norwegians in the southern border, would Tucker Carlson be saying the same thing? But it just happens to be 20,000 Black Haitians and Central Americans. And by the way, if he thinks that Haitians and Central Americans are more obedient, I was born in Nicaragua. I suggest that one day he leave his little bubble in his studio and get out of this country and go see what people. Let's remember that Haiti was one of the first republics in the hemisphere that declared its independence, that it was slaves rebelling in Haiti that made it one of the first independent countries in the hemisphere.
No indication that he knows that or would certainly share that with his audience. I do want to ask you about something happening in your home state, which is that the governor putting in place this Surgeon General who is, look, if you look at his resume on paper, Harvard, PhD, looks pretty good. But then once you look into what he has talked about, he's anti-mask, he's vaccine skeptical, he's appeared at these America's Frontline Doctor events with, for instance, I think the demon sperm doctor who clearly has problems with facts. What do you think about this?
And demons.
Yeah, I think Ron DeSantis found a guy who is Ron DeSantis with a medical degree. Right? Listen, Ron DeSantis is a guy who's also a Harvard and Yale grad. And the guy we're seeing now in Florida, this Governor Ron DeSantis, is very different than the guy who was first elected. And let's remember that Ron DeSantis got elected by a very slim margin. There was a recount in Florida. Well, there's always a recount in Florida. But, and he came in talking about the environment. He came in trying to be conciliatory. But he's obviously decided that he wants to run for president, that he wants the Republican nomination, and that the way to do it is to cater to the Republican Donald Trump base. And that means the folks who embrace anti-science, who deny vaccines, who believe in, cattle dewormers, we see him over and over taking this as a crusade, right? Whether it's suing school boards, whether it's telling local governments that he's going to fine them if they issue mask mandates. And now with his pick for Surgeon General. But look, the bottom line is, as a Floridian, as somebody who lives in Florida and whose life is directly impacted and affected by this, the numbers of deaths and hospitalizations we've seen out of Florida and out of the states that are not vaccinated, the 10 least vaccinated states, are gruesome, are scary, are painful. Those are real people. And so putting politics over people's lives really is shameful in a way that I hope people will not forget. Floridians will not forget.